Indigenous Cultures Available to Save Humanity by Raquel Urroz Canán. Audiobook. Las culturas autóctonas disponibles para salvar a la humanidad, de Raquel Urroz Canán. Audiolibro. Traducción y locución en inglés por Daniela Mena. Translated into the English language and narrated by Daniela Mena. Chapter 5. Indigenous Peoples in the Face of European Conquest and Colonialism. The ideas produced in Europe have been applied to the Indo-American indigenous reality based on cultural categories that are different from their own. That is, from the perspective imposed by an external civilization, to how the new colonial order was imposed. Eurocentric labels, or the system of the values and concepts, have minimized the achievements and discredited the cultural attributes and potential of the American peoples. With arrogance, ambition, dispossession, and enslavement, a turn in the history of these people began, modifying and imposing an idea of the human being and the world, and constructing their own version of universal history as the only valid and true one. Today, it is more necessary than ever to reclaim ancestral American cultures to refer to a reality that arises from particular historical conditions. In addition to the need to restore fundamental dignity to those who were dispossessed of their lands and ideologies through foreign invasions, it is essential to rescue and revalue the patterns of subsistence, social organization systems, and the relation model with nature practiced by indigenous peoples. It is they who are now available to propose a respectful, loving, and harmonious model, an alternative system of human community for a sustainable future. The Spanish conquest and colonization destroyed the complex universe of pre-Hispanic institutions that cultivated the knowledge and sciences of their world. However, in rural areas and among indigenous peoples, ancestral cosmovisions continue to operate, which are based on a close relationship with the environment. Their agricultural practices and knowledge about water sources and fields constitute an important cultural legacy that deserves to be valued, appreciated, and studied in the face of the imminent dangers of widespread ecological destruction worldwide. Examples of resistance and cultural continuity. Many of the components found in the practices and cults of Mexico's indigenous societies have historical roots. However, over the past centuries, they have had to adapt and creatively reformulate their communal life for the proper social and cultural reproduction of their peoples. Although the Catholic liturgy and calendar were imposed within the institutional frameworks demanded by the Church 500 years ago, today, healers, weather experts, shamans, ritual specialists, stewards, and governors of indigenous communities are largely responsible for ensuring the well-being of their social group. This is because their authorities have the ability to connect with the sacred world. Their profession and corporeality are of a divine nature. They serve as intermediaries between different cosmic planes and, therefore, contribute to the maintenance and social and natural order that ensures the community's well-being. It is through lineage, socially generated prestige, and the acquisition of the people's knowledge that they are capable of acting in favor of the ecosystem's balance through performance and ritual. Thus, the ceremonial life of indigenous peoples is organized in such a way that their collective actions allow for the renewal of the cycles of life and reproduction. Some traditional societies today still prioritize the care of their agricultural production, and Mexican farmers continue to be guided by the rhythms of nature. They possess the knowledge to read and decipher the stars and their movements, calculate rainfall patterns, and understand climate cycles. It is the connection between these communities and the elements of nature that constitutes and underpins their cosmovisions, which are now inhabited and harmed by contemporary measures that result in environmental destruction. The continuities that still persist, both in their practices and beliefs, are evident in the countryside, in their way of cohabiting within extended families in neighborhoods, in their cycle of festivities, rituals, dedicatory offerings, and in the milpa farming technology. Certain fundamental principles endure there, with the central concept being the cosmos as a unity, where human beings are not positioned as the axis or dominating force that controls the universe, but rather as an integral part of the natural world. Tonantzin and Guadalupe. In the process of cultural and biological syncretism that unfolded over the past 500 years, a new regime and a new way of thinking were imposed. However, the impact of conquest and colonization was incomplete, or rather, it failed to penetrate or replace the deeper foundations of indigenous cosmovision. Throughout the centuries, it has been possible to preserve certain ways of perceiving and interpreting the world through cultural filters deeply rooted in ancestral knowledge. Subsequent reworkings incorporated elements foreign to their culture and added Catholic forms of worship, but without disregarding the essence of their devotion, their communication with the sacred world, and their respect to the environment. As a result, customs and rituals still persist, but are always connected to the ecosystem and agriculture, relying on the land, rain, and mountains to establish the necessary correspondence between humanity and the sacred world. Let us examine the great example of cultural and spiritual syncretism achieved among the Mexican peoples, which today serves as a spiritual bond for all Mexicans. The cult of the Virgin of Guadalupe, or Tonantzin, represents the ultimate social cohesion or moral identity of the Mexican people and is also one of the largest and most significant religious phenomena in the world. Its image, the Mariofanias, a term used to describe the apparitions or manifestations of the Virgin Mary, and the belief in her appearance traced back to 1531 within the imposed colonial order. However, when we refer to the historical, ethnographic, and archaeological evidence regarding the goddess Tonantzin, our dead mother, or Coatlicue herself, we can see the symbolic motherhood of the Nahua world. We also notice that this devotion is an ancestral tradition that stems from the veneration of Mother Earth. It is, in fact, an ancient cult of fertility, the origin of life, and the underworld that receives us in its depths. The power of its cult, along with its message, intertwined with the Guadalupan image in a way that made it possible to keep alive the spiritual notion of the intercessory mother, the one who protects, embraces, and shelters. Thus, more than its historicity and tradition, it is primarily the strength of its pre-Hispanic origins that still resonates in social action and popular identity in relation to Mother Earth and the sacred mountain of Tepeyac. The indigenous peoples, along with their creative resistance and adaptive strength, are an example of healthy appropriation and integration of cultural heterogeneity, of their ability to reinterpret diverse beliefs and transform them into popular religiosity where there is no absolute good or evil, or a single God as an all-powerful judge. Rather, it is the indigenous way of thinking that is constantly reworked and affirms its place in the world as an integral part of a living and collective whole, which is the planet Earth. Chapter 6: Community and Ritual. The basis of communion between human beings and nature. The basis of organization among indigenous peoples throughout the colonial era and into contemporary times has been social cohesion and cultural plurality. What happened under the viceregal order and later under modern regimes was the disintegration of their structures as full and autonomous political bodies. In other words, the historical foundation of indigenous peoples as expressions of political organization disappeared as a result of the conquest. Kings, priests, and the warrior caste were dismantled. However, the main communities, along with their indigenous governors, as well as the towns and neighborhoods with their mayors, retained their governing responsibilities. The existence of public rituals and the set of annual ceremonies demonstrate the persistence of the belief system and their cosmologies. Those responsible for carrying out the rituals unleash the possibility of performing propitiatory ceremonies to obtain prosperity, health, and good harvests for the community. Therefore, the chiefs or heads of the villages, who receive the rod of leadership as a symbol of prestige, are accompanied by the ritual specialists who oversee the ceremonies to contribute to the proper functioning of natural and agricultural cycles. Political religious power and ceremonial functions are shared between the governor and the ritual specialist as a sort of partnership, as both act in solidarity. In recent centuries, indigenous governments have undergone transformations through the incorporation of new figures and forms of political and religious organization. For example, certain government positions responsible for carrying out annual indigenous ceremonies dedicated to Catholic saints were established. Each brotherhood led to the worship of the patron saint, and to this day, one or several stewards, as well as the deputies responsible for specific tasks such as food, festivities, and commercial operations, are appointed. This communal structure within the organization of indigenous peoples, consolidated during the colonial era, has continued to evolve in its models of position systems. However, the responsibility of both the governor and the council, as well as all mayors, prosecutors, and brotherhoods, is linked to the fulfillment of the annual festival calendar, which is in turn guided by the knowledge, traditions, costumes, and ancestral knowledge. In reality, indigenous communities rely on a collective way of promoting the survival and prosperity of their members through ritual. The authorities of the community are responsible for dispensing justice and, at the same time, fulfilling ceremonial functions. The fundamental key, however, lies in the fact that once the staff of authority is handed over and the corresponding purification is performed, there is a formal presentation of the new leader to the natural powers of the territory and the surrounding landscape. In this way, the symbols of power, such as the staff and other objects, are purified and imbued with sacred significance. The ceremony seeks to align the cycle of power of the new governing group with the daily and annual solar cycle, as well as to purify, expel, and protect the community from negative influences that may infiltrate. It should be noted that the social logic in the world of indigenous societies throughout their pre-Hispanic and modern history was never associated with individualism or political hierarchies, but rather with prestige, collective work, and ritual life. Furthermore, since the relationship between the religious and social spheres is so close, the system of positions should be seen as the convergence of cultural representation expressed in its ceremonial structure, serving as a manifestation of collective identity and group belonging. In this way, indigenous societies transformed into autonomous, egalitarian, and democratic communities, while also being multi-ethnic and pluricultural. Work and reciprocity. The indigenous system of social and political organization links civil and religious positions, so that it is through general consensus that the accumulated prestige of the ruler or leader is recognized, which is reinforced by community unity. In the same way, the economy of indigenous tradition still functions through the system of positions, resulting in the redistribution of wealth rather than its accumulation in the hands of a few. Likewise, the economic sphere of trade operates as a communal process, seeking reciprocity and cooperative work or tekit in favor of the community, rather than extracting surplus or seeking economic profit. The workforce and the bonds that are formed through it allowed for the organization of communal life around the annual festivities. In the ceremonial cycle, all living beings and spiritual forces are included and organized to fulfill their part. Women, men, saints, the deceased, animals, plants, natural phenomena, and elements of the landscape. They all enter into a cycle of reciprocity and become vehicles of energy exchange that circulates everywhere, manifesting itself through social relations and enabling cultural reproduction. In other words, Each person and each thing transmits its vital energy through what it gives and receives in a constant exchange of labor and goods. The powers of the natural world, deities, saints, and the deceased are also included because they work to ensure that the living contribute to vital balance. Even objects generate relationships and contribute to the vital energy that circulates in the community, referred to as chicahualitzli. Therefore, beyond understanding them as commodities, material goods convey and carry symbols capable of conveying and transmitting care, well-being, and everything that is considered precious, which is related to the reciprocal relationships that fluctuate between the gods and their sacred forces. Today, the social organization of indigenous communities is not based on wealth, resource, extraction, or power. Instead, it is rooted in shared democratic values, where the favorable or unfavorable costumes and practices for the majority are constantly questioned. The subsistence pattern and social organization of indigenous communities in Chiapas, Oaxaca, and Guerrero, for example, cultivate historical continuity and fundamental values that sustain the indigenous communities. The economic model is not based on resource extraction for the accumulation of profits by a few, nor is it about the accumulation of money. Instead, it is the work in favor of the community that allows for the redistribution of vital energy, legitimized solely by internally constructed prestige. Indigenous territoriality, with its historical roots, has nothing to do with the global space influenced by economic, industrial, and technological forces. For example, when corn is treated as a commodity, it becomes detached from its cultural, religious, social, and ritual context. Similarly, when a natural site is destroyed within its sacred environment for exploitation, the entire community is affected. The community is conceived as a part of a natural and social whole that maintains sustainable development. Chapter 7. Indigenous peoples 500 years later. With the Industrial Revolution, coal became the primary source for generating electricity. Then, especially in recent decades, the burning of fossil fuels such as oil, gas, and coal has polluted the air and degraded the soil. Humanity has been dedicated to material, cultural, and environmental destruction due to a lack of knowledge and love for Mother Earth and all living beings that comprise the planet. The environmental crisis that has already reached us today includes climate change, environmental pollution, and biodiversity loss, resulting in droughts, rising temperatures, deforestation, and the destabilization of air and sea currents. All of this constitutes a warning of anthropogenic extermination. Mexico holds the key to salvation because its indigenous peoples are available to rescue humanity and the earth. The Mexican territory is one of the 12 mega-diverse countries in the world. The diversity of Mexican landscapes is the result of the variability of the soils, along with its mountain ranges, valleys, plateaus, desert areas, and tropical zones. However, agrobiodiversity is the result of utilization, exchange, proper management, innovation, and improvement of natural goods and cultivable plants, meaning it is culturally created. In other words, Mexico's biological and cultural heritage has developed and been preserved by indigenous peoples through the combination of their ancestral knowledge, productive practices, beliefs, and both the concrete relationship and symbolic interpretation they have with the natural world. The efficient management of landscapes by indigenous peoples includes the protection, maintenance, and conservation of Mexico's diverse ecosystems. In their communities, communal lands, and small-scale properties, diverse production strategies are created to meet their needs. But that's not all. By producing moderate quantities but a wide range of crops and species in different ecological zones and microhabitats, they provide environmental services to ecosystems. Agroecosystems in the indigenous world result from a type of cultivation that protects one another, known as polyculture, which involves mixed planting of cereals or the combination of species in the same field or milpa. This minimizes the risk to their agricultural systems while forming regional adaptations with a high variety of natural goods. When we combine agricultural territories and indigenous localities on geographical features, we have a representation of over 14% of Mexican territory. Additionally, the social ownership of their peoples encompasses over 77%. Therefore, the first step is to recognize this territorialization of spatial organization of Mexico to understand the importance and urgency of respecting its management and conservation. It is precisely the indigenous societies that coexist with the land and water in a relationship of respect and care. Land and water constitute the fundamental duo of their culture, and the elements of nature and their allies. That is why they are the true guardians of ecosystems, because they understand that it is the only home to accommodate humanity. It is these Mexican communities that understand and address the dynamics of the water cycle, which is now disrupted by exploitation and mismanagement carried out by the hegemonic power and misguided practices that disturb vegetation cover and erode the soil. The genuine custodians of the environment are the traditional groups attached to their land because they work towards proper water collection, which serves to maintain the balance of ecosystems. In fact, the core relation between the inhabitants of indigenous languages and the territories as water collecting agents in Mexico is clear and demonstrable. In other words, their territories coincide with areas where watersheds exist and there are runoff channels, or with hydrological regions that form aquifers through infiltration or for capturing water in reservoirs. Between both, that is, the water sources and the indigenous inhabitants, there is not an exploitative relationship causing environmental degradation, but rather one of care, love, and respect, because that is the home for all inhabitants of the planet. Final reflection. Today, global values are largely shaped by capitalism and modern science. However, the indigenous peoples of Mexico, with their ancestral wisdom, offer a potential new civilization paradigm capable of saving humanity. Mesoamerica is the future. Their knowledge is transmitted and cherished, and their descendants are alive, as is their historical memory. The components of their worldviews have their roots in pre-Hispanic times, and while these groups have incorporated aspects of the modern world, they are still guided by their own philosophy of life based on respect for nature and love for all living beings. This worldview continues to be practiced in agricultural work and the organization of traditional communities because their practices are still communal, and they maintain their existence through their connection to the land and the elements of their natural environment, thereby perpetuating their beliefs and rituals in a multicultural manner. One clue we have to recognize the indigenous peoples of Mexico is the presence of 7 million speakers of indigenous languages living in the country. However, the roots that delve into the past are also preserved in their organizing principles and worldviews, which explain the natural and social world as an integrated whole, the result of reciprocity and collaboration among all living beings. But public and private policies, in general, tend to be homogenizing and imposing, as well as Western educational models. Therefore, the measures that led to the extinction of the environment are grave and dangerous because by displacing or destroying alternative and sustainable ways of life based on ancestral worldviews, traditional communities are under attack, as well as the entire plant and animal world. The loss of their autonomy and the lack of respect for their worldviews undermine habitability on Earth and pose an existential threat. One of the teachings of indigenous peoples is the preservation of multiple worldviews and polytheistic beliefs because openness and inclusion allow for the development of forms of coexistence that integrate difference and the unknown. Nature itself is conceived as a collection of opposing, yet complementary elements that maintain cosmic balance. The world is loved and respected in its diversity and cannot be seen as a product to be extracted and consumed. Part of the difficulty in fully understanding these ancestral worldviews is due to the civilization of individuals, where the capacity to empathetically integrate others and construct shared visions of the world has been lost. This lack of understanding and respect for the ritual life of indigenous peoples represents an attack and collapse of ancestral wisdom that cohesively reproduces meanings through symbolic actions that are repeated periodically over time. Without ritual practices, the sense and stability necessary to inhabit the earth and celebrate life are lost. When we understand that the pre-Hispanic indigenous world and contemporary traditional societies do not base their economic relationships on money, we dignify the person along with their work and production, without separating them from their environment and historical memory. The dominant form of globalization does not respect sacred territories, nor does it value diversity or respect the millennia-old timelines of ancient cultures around the world. When human beings lose their roots, their true place in the world that identifies and gives them meaning, and when they forget about Mother Earth, the entire planet is affected as a whole. Mexico is the center of origin and diversification of corn, and the worldviews of its people are orderly, structured, and respectful of nature because they understand that we are one and the same. This planet is a living body, and these cultures conceive it. One cannot harm one part without affecting the whole. Material and cultural heritage, both tangible and intangible, require recognition, promotion, and protection in order to allow their values and vision to flourish, which will help restore what has been stolen and destroyed to the earth. The adoption of the spiritual values of indigenous peoples by contemporary societies is the necessary paradigm for civilizational change, the development of humanity, and the survival of the human species, as well as animals and plants. Epilogue. This work seeks to invite internal dialogue and provoke reflections based on informed knowledge, so as to counteract the disregard that has prevailed towards the ancient cultures of Mexico and indigenous communities, and contribute to the recognition, respect, and necessary dignity of this often marginalized or underestimated sector of the country. Although this essay does not demonstrate the application of its own ethnographic method, the concepts expressed in the text are the result of a decade of studies within the framework of social anthropology for the purpose of dissemination. Minimal Bibliography. Baez Jorge Félix. Debates en torno a lo sagrado. Religión popular y hegemonía clerical en el México indígena. Biblioteca Universidad Veracruzana, 2011, México. Barabas M. Alicia. Territorialidad indígena en el México contemporáneo. Enchungara. Revista de Antropología Chilena. 46.3. Universidad de Tarapacá, 2014, Chile. Barros Cristina y Buenrostro Marco Tlacualero. Alimentación y cultura de los antiguos mexicanos. Instituto Nacional de Ciencias Médicas y Nutrición. Salvador Subirán, Secretaría de Salud, 2016, México. Bartolomé Miguel Alberto. Reflexiones sobre las identidades de los grupos étnicos, en Arqueología Mexicana. Noviembre, número 171, Editorial Raíces, 2021, México. Boeg Eckhart. El patrimonio biocultural de los pueblos indígenas de México, hacia la conservación in situ de la biodiversidad y agrobiodiversidad en los territorios indígenas. INAH, Comisión Nacional para el Desarrollo de los Pueblos Indígenas, 2010, México. Bonfil Batalla, Guillermo. El maíz. Fundamento de la cultura popular mexicana. Conaculta, 2012, México. Broda Joana. Calendarios, cosmovisión y observación de la naturaleza, en temas mesoamericanos. Sonia Lombardo y Enrique Nalda. INAH Conaculta, 1996, México. Broda Joana y Catherine Good Eshelman. Historia y vida ceremonial en las comunidades mesoamericanas. Los ritos agrícolas. INAH y UNAM. 2004, México. Deuf Daniel. La realeza sagrada en México. Siglos XVI al XXI. Secretaría de Cultura. INAH. El Colegio de Michoacán. SEMCA. 2016, México. Fernández Cristliev Federico. El petate y la jícara. Los estudios de paisaje cultural en México. Edición Hispanic, UNAM, 2020. Florescano Enrique. Quetzalcóatl y los mitos de fundación en Mesoamérica. Edición Taurus, 2012. Gámez Espinosa, Alejandra y Alfredo López Austin. Cosmovisión mesoamericana. Reflexiones, polémicas y etnografías. El Colegio de México. Fondo de Cultura Económica. BUAP, México. García Martínez Bernardo. Tiempos y lugares. Antología de estudios sobre poblamiento, pueblos, ganadería y geografía en México. El Colegio de México. 2014, México. Jiménez Gilberto. Identidades sociales. Colección Intersecciones. Conaculta. 2009, México. Good Eshelman. Catherine y Corona de la Peña. Laura Elena. Comida, cultura y modernidad en México. Perspectivas antropológicas e históricas. CONACYT, ENA, INA, Conaculta. 2011, México. Good Eshelman. Catherine y Alonso Bolaños Marina. Unidad y diversidad en Mesoamérica. Debates antropológicos, etnográficos, históricos. Secretaría de Cultura, INA, 2019, México. Han Byung-chul. La desaparición de los rituales. Una topografía del presente. Herder, 2020, Barcelona. Harvey David. Espacios del capitalismo global. Hacia una teoría del desarrollo geográfico desigual. Ediciones ACAL, 2021, España. Kirchhoff, Paul. Escritos selectos. En Carlos García Mora, Linda Manzanilla y Jesús Monjaraz Ruiz. UNAM, IA, 2002, México. López Caballero Paula. Indígenas de la Nación. Etnografía histórica de la alteridad en México. Milpa Alta. Siglos XVII-XIX. FCE, 2017, México. López Austin Alfredo y López Luján Leonardo. El pasado indígena. El Colegio de México. Fondo de Cultura Económica. 1996, México. Medina Andrés. En las cuatro esquinas en el centro. Etnografía de la cosmovisión mesoamericana. 2004. México. UNAM, IA. Medina Hernández Andrés. Pueblos antiguos, ciudad diversa. Una definición etnográfica de los pueblos originarios de la Ciudad de México. Instituto de Investigaciones Antropológicas. UNAM, 2007, México. Mora Teresa. Los pueblos originarios de la Ciudad de México. Atlas Geográfico. Gobierno del Distrito Federal. Instituto Nacional de Antropología e Historia. México, 2008. Palerm Ángel y Eric Wolf. Agricultura y civilización en Mesoamérica. CEP, 1972, México. Ramírez C. Elisa. Del surco a la troje. Mitos y textos sobre el maíz. Pluralia UNAM, 2020, México. Rivera Carbó Eulalia. Edición y presentación. Geografía y paisaje. Instituto de Investigaciones José María Luis Mora, 2022, México. Toledo Víctor M. Barrera Basol Narciso. La memoria biocultural. La importancia ecológica de las sabidurías tradicionales. Icaria Editorial, 2009, Barcelona. Toledo Víctor M. Barrera Basol Narciso y Boeg Eckhart. ¿Qué es la diversidad biocultural? UNAM, 2019, México. Acknowledgements. To my friend, Erika Gonzalez, for encouraging me to write this essay with a more spiritual character, while still maintaining historical and anthropological grounding. To everyone who helped me shape it for its final submission. Maria Hortensia for her efforts from Cabo. The great writer Susana Pagano for her editing. Translators Agustin and Xoloin. Norberto for his arrangements in Mexico City. And Diana Fabian for her beautiful designs. Lastly, I want to express my gratitude to the wind, who caused the coordinated movement for all the parts, allowing one of my dreams to become a reality. The maguey, which still provides us with fibers, sugars, and liquids adapted to the desertic and harsh environment, just as the indigenous groups integrated themselves into their landscape successfully.
Créditos. Dirección: Aura Carolina Cervantes. Productor: Jorge González Torres. Diseño y animación: Diana Fabián. Asistente de dirección: Mariana Cervantes. Diseño sonoro: Pablo Márquez. Grabación: Pablo Márquez y Rey Coyote. Intérprete sonoro y musical: Pablo Márquez. Violín en capítulo 7, Ailén Yuseli González Juárez, de San Juan Mixtepec, Oaxaca. Flauta Ikoots, Hugo Alberto Hidalgo Buenavista, de San Mateo del Mar, Oaxaca. Grabado en estudio Radio Comunalidad de Guelatao Dejuárez, Oaxaca. Estudio Santos Sonidos, Ciudad de México. Ingenieros: Emanuel Esquivel Ayala, Alan Olivares Martínez. Directores: Alejandro Orozco, Carla Castañeda, Luis Fernando Orozco, Bruno Coronel. Estudio Machete Label, Puebla, Puebla. Ingeniero: Óscar Ramos Pérez. Foco Rojo Estudio, Oaxaca de Juárez. Ingeniero: Gilberto Vargas Maña. Estudio Neblina, Jalapa, Veracruz. Ingenieros: Aldo Emanuel Morales Carrasco, Jesús Eduardo Galicia Cadena, Enrique Wilmer. Caliente Records, San Cristóbal de las Casas, Chiapas. Ingeniero: Fernando Jiménez González.